At 35,000 feet, a Boeing 737 is dying. Both experienced pilots declare defeat over the intercom. They can't save the plane. But when two F-22 fighter jets detect the legendary call sign, Viper 9, coming from a teenage passenger in seat 14C, everything changes. She's their only hope. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. The Boeing 737 cruised smoothly at 35,000 feet through crystalline morning skies above the Rocky Mountains. In seat 14C, 15-year-old Maya Castellano sat with white earbuds trailing to the phone in her lap. She wore faded jeans, worn Converse sneakers, and an oversized hoodie, her dark hair pulled into a messy ponytail. To every passenger and crew member, she was utterly unremarkable, just another kid traveling alone. The flight attendant paused at her row with that tone adults reserve for unaccompanied minors. "Doing okay, sweetie? Can I get you anything?" Maya smiled politely. "I'm good, thanks." The businessman in 14B glanced at her over his laptop, probably traveling between divorced parents' homes or attending some school program. What none of them knew was that Maya Castellano carried the call sign, Viper 9, in military aviation databases spanning 4 generations of combat pilots. Her great-grandfather had flown P-51 Mustangs with the Tuskegee Airmen. Her grandfather had piloted F-4 Phantoms over Vietnam, earning a Distinguished Flying Cross. Her mother, Major Sarah Castellano, flew F-35 Lightning IIs out of Nellis Air Force Base. Her father, Lieutenant Commander Marcus Castellano, had been a Top Gun instructor before a training accident took his aircraft into the Pacific 3 years ago, his final transmission, Viper 9, going down. Maya had inherited the call sign through demonstrated capability. At 13, she'd scored in the 98th percentile on spatial reasoning assessments. At 14, she'd talked her uncle's aircraft out of a stall during a flight lesson. By 15, she'd absorbed more practical aviation knowledge than most commercial pilots learn in entire careers, not through formal training but through osmosis, growing up in ready rooms and briefing spaces, falling asleep to discussions of energy management and tactical geometry. When her mother's squadron commander watched Maya accurately brief a hypothetical combat scenario, he'd simply nodded. "Viper 9 it is." The first indication something was catastrophically wrong came as a subtle vibration most passengers didn't notice. Maya felt it immediately, a harmonic frequency in the airframe that shouldn't exist. She pulled out one earbud and listened. The engine note had changed pitch. Through her window, she saw a barely perceptible trail of vapor from the starboard wing suggesting hydraulic fluid escaping. Her mind began assembling puzzle pieces with precision. In the cockpit, Captain David Morrison and First Officer Jennifer Walsh were having a morning about to become catastrophically worse. The master caution light illuminated, followed by cascading system warnings that made no sense. They'd lost hydraulic pressure in 2 of 3 systems simultaneously, which shouldn't be possible. The flight control computer generated error messages suggesting impossible conditions. Morrison had been flying for 23 years and had never seen anything like this. Walsh began running emergency checklists, but every procedure failed or made things worse. Seattle Center, United 2847, declaring an emergency, Morrison's voice remained professionally calm, but Maya heard underlying tension. Multiple system failures, unknown origin, request priority handling and nearest suitable airport. The response crackled through cabin speakers now active due to electrical malfunctions. United 2847, roger your emergency. Nearest field is Billings, Montana, bearing 095, 112 nautical miles. The situation deteriorated with horrifying speed. The primary flight display went dark, then flickered showing impossible data. The autopilot disengaged. The aircraft began an uncommanded roll that Morrison corrected with inputs that felt mushy and unresponsive. Hydraulic fluid quantity was dropping in all systems. The vibration Maya had noticed grew stronger, indicating something fundamentally wrong with structural integrity. "Jenny, we need to get down right now," Morrison said, fear breaking through his composure. This aircraft is coming apart. They attempted to isolate hydraulic failures, but isolation valves weren't responding. They tried resetting flight control computers, but systems wouldn't initialize. The aircraft was dying around them in ways that defied training and experience. 20 minutes into the emergency, descending through 31,000 feet because they could no longer maintain level flight, Captain Morrison made the decision that would define the next 8 minutes. He keyed the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is the captain. I need to be honest about our situation." The cabin fell silent. "We are experiencing multiple critical system failures we cannot resolve. Both myself and First Officer Walsh have exhausted every procedure available. We have lost effective control of the aircraft. I want to tell you we can fix this, but I would be lying. I'm sorry. We've done everything we know, and it's not enough. Please use remaining time to contact loved ones. I'm truly sorry." The cabin erupted. Passengers screamed, cried, grabbed phones. Flight attendants tried maintaining order while knowing it was futile. The businessman in 14B sobbed into his phone. The woman across the aisle prayed in Spanish. Children cried. It was the sound of 217 people confronting imminent death. Maya sat perfectly still in the chaos, her mind accelerating into that crystalline state her mother called combat time, where seconds stretched and decades of inherited knowledge organized into tactical solutions. The pilots weren't wrong. By conventional understanding, the situation was unsolvable. But Maya didn't think in commercial aviation terms. She thought in combat aviation, where impossible situations were daily occurrences and pilots flew aircraft actively trying to kill them and still brought them home. She thought of her grandfather's stories about landing F-4 Phantoms with no hydraulics. She thought of her father's lessons about creative problem-solving when every system fails. Most importantly, she thought in terms of call signs and legacy and the expectation that when your name is Viper, giving up isn't an option. She pulled out her phone and accessed an app civilians didn't know existed, a military family emergency communication system. Her fingers flew across the screen, entering the code that would flag her location and call sign to military aircraft in the area. It was a violation of protocols, but her mother had been clear: if you're ever in a situation where people will die and you can help, use it. I'll handle the consequences. At Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana, two F-22 Raptors on a routine training mission received an alert that made both pilots do double takes. Raptor 2-1, are you seeing this? Major Jake Hammer Rodriguez keyed his radio. That's a Viper call sign, civilian aircraft, 32,000 feet, 60 miles southeast. His wingman, Captain Lisa Blade Chen, pulled up details. Hammer, that's Viper 9. As in the Viper 9, Marcus Castellano's kid. In the fighter community, some call signs were legendary. Viper 1 through Viper 8 represented 4 generations of excellence. Viper 9 was supposed to be next generation, a teenager who wasn't supposed to be flying anything dangerous for another decade. She's on United 2847, Blade continued. Multiple system failures, crew declared situation unsolvable. They're going down. Hammer made a decision that would either earn commendation or court-martial. Raptor flight going tactical. United 2847, this is Air Force Raptor 2-1, we are 2 F-22s currently northeast inbound to assist. Be advised we have confirmation that Viper 9 is aboard your aircraft. Request you put us in contact with that passenger immediately. The cockpit response was confused and desperate. Raptor 2-1, we don't understand. Viper 9 is a military call sign. We don't have military personnel aboard, just civilians. Unless you can physically fly this aircraft, there's nothing anyone can do. Hammer's response was urgent. United 2847, check your manifest for Castellano, probably a teenager traveling alone. Get her to a cabin phone immediately. That is a direct instruction from the United States Air Force. That kid might be the only reason any of you survive the next 10 minutes. The flight attendant stared at Maya with wide, uncomprehending eyes as the message relayed from the cockpit. Maya was already unbuckling, moving forward through chaos with smooth efficiency. She picked up the cabin phone, her voice dropping into a register that shocked adults within earshot, calm, professional, carrying authority that didn't match her age. Viper 9 on frequency. Raptor flight, confirm you are 2 F-22s currently northeast and inbound. Hammer responded immediately. Viper 9, Raptor 2-1, confirm 2 ship, currently 12 minutes out. Your mother is going to kill me for this, but we need your eyes and brain. What's your assessment? Maya closed her eyes and let 4 generations of knowledge flow through her consciousness. Raptor flight, Viper 9. Based on vibration signatures, uncommanded roll tendency, hydraulic failure pattern, and electrical anomalies, assessment is catastrophic tail section structural damage, possibly bird strike or drone impact that compromised empennage and created cascading failures. The aircraft thinks it's seeing multiple system failures because structural sensors are reporting impossible data due to frame distortion. Pilots are troubleshooting ghosts while the real problem is the vertical stabilizer attachment structure is failing. She paused. The solution isn't in any commercial checklist because commercial procedures assume structural integrity. We need to stabilize using asymmetric thrust management and differential roll inputs to compensate for your instability from tail damage. Fly it like a damaged fighter, not a broken airliner. In the cockpit, Morrison and Walsh stared at each other in shock as they listened to a 15-year-old diagnose their failure with precision exceeding their combined experience. Who is this kid? Walsh whispered. Morrison keyed the intercom. Miss, with all respect, we're dealing with catastrophic emergency, we don't have time for. Hammer's voice cut through, hard and absolute. Captain, I strongly advise you shut up and listen. That kid is Viper 9. Her great-grandfather flew with Tuskegee Airmen. Her grandfather has a distinguished flying cross from Vietnam. Her mother is one of the top F-35 pilots in the Air Force. Her father was a Top Gun instructor who died saving his student 3 years ago. She's been absorbing combat aviation knowledge since before she could walk. She just diagnosed your structural failure from the passenger cabin using inherited instinct and observation. You already admitted you can't save your aircraft. Let her try. Maya began walking commercial pilots through procedures never designed for civilian aircraft but representing accumulated wisdom of pilots who'd learned to fly damaged aircraft through sheer will. Captain Morrison, stop thinking about this as a commercial airliner with failed systems. Start thinking about it as a damaged fighter still capable of controlled flight if you give up conventional approaches. First, stop trying to use autopilot and automated systems. They're receiving corrupted data and making things worse. Go full manual, both on controls, physical awareness only. Second, hydraulic failures are secondary symptoms. Stop troubleshooting them and accept they're degraded. Third, your primary control is engine thrust differential. Set up asymmetric thrust management, left engine at 70%, right engine varying between 60 and 80 to control yaw. Use throttles like a helicopter uses tail rotor, constantly adjusting to maintain directional control. Blades F-22 closed within visual range, running external cameras over the stricken airliner. Viper 9, Raptor 2-2, confirm your assessment is accurate. Visual on significant structural damage to vertical stabilizer attachment points. The tail is flexing in ways absolutely not supposed to happen. The empennage is being held on by prayers and composite materials. Also seeing hydraulic fluid streaming from multiple locations. How did you diagnose this from inside the cabin? Maya's response was matter of fact. The vibration signature matched stories my grandfather told about bringing damaged phantoms home from North Vietnam. Same harmonic frequency when the tail is trying to separate. Once you know what it sounds like, you don't forget. Raptor flight, I need you to talk Morrison and Walsh through this because they're locked into commercial procedures. They need to think like fighter pilots. Hammer began talking Morrison through the impossible maneuver of flying a disintegrating airliner like a damaged combat aircraft. Captain Morrison, listen to Viper 9 and me. You're not landing this aircraft conventionally. That's off the table. The tail won't survive normal landing loads. Instead, you're executing what we call tactical emergency recovery. You're going to crash this bird in the most controlled way possible. You're not aiming for a runway. You're aiming for the flattest terrain you can find and putting it down gear up at minimum controllable airspeed using asymmetric thrust to maintain directional control right until impact. It's going to be rough, scary, but survivable if you do exactly what we tell you. Maya cross-referenced terrain maps, her mind calculating approach angles with intuitive mathematics. Viper 9 to cockpit, recommend emergency landing site at coordinates I'm sending now. Dry lake bed in Wyoming, 28 miles southwest, 8,000 feet of flat, hard-packed surface. Raptor flight, can you provide vectors? Blade was already calculating. Affirm, Viper 9. United 2847, turn right heading 220, begin descent to flight level 250, maintain descent rate 1,000 feet per minute. We'll walk you down. Morrison's hands shook as he began the turn, feeling the aircraft respond in ways that violated every instinct. The asymmetric thrust approach Maya suggested was actually working, differential power providing yaw stability the damaged tail could no longer supply. Walsh was crying while maintaining perfect execution. I can't believe we're taking aviation advice from a high school kid. Maya's response carried weight that silenced every doubt. You're not taking advice from a high school kid. You're taking advice from 4 generations of pilots who refused to let impossible situations kill them. My great-grandfather flew his Mustang home with 3 cylinders shot out. My grandfather landed his Phantom using engine thrust after losing all hydraulics over Hanoi. My father saved his student by putting his dying Hornet into the ocean so his wingman could eject safely. I'm a Viper, Captain. We don't give up, and we don't let our aircraft quit while people are depending on them. Now fly your airplane and save your passengers. The descent was controlled chaos, every second a negotiation between physics, damaged systems, and human will. Morrison and Walsh flew with precision they didn't know they possessed, guided by a teenager in the cabin and 2 fighter pilots on their wings. The F-22s had become their eyes, calling out altitude, airspeed, attitude changes, providing vectors and corrections commercial instruments could no longer reliably supply. Maya stood in the forward galley, phone pressed to her ear, calling out observations that saved lives with every sentence. You're developing slight left roll tendency, compensate with right engine increased to 73%. Vibration amplitude increasing, recommend descent rate to 1,200 feet per minute to reduce structural loads. Nose attitude is good but you need 3 degrees more right rudder trim. You're doing great, Captain. You're flying this bird exactly right. My father would be proud of both of you. The passengers had stopped screaming and started watching the teenager who transformed from anonymous high schooler into their only hope. The businessmen in 14B stared at her with awe, trying to reconcile the girl listening to music an hour ago with the aviation expert saving 200 lives. Flight attendants followed Maya's occasional instructions, secure this, prepare that, check these passengers, all delivered with matter-of-fact authority. United 2847, Raptor 21, you are 15 miles from touchdown point, descent profile is good, maintain current power settings. Viper 9, how are the passengers? Maya glanced back at the cabin, seeing fear but also hope. Raptor flight, Viper 9, cabin is secure, passengers are prepared. Cockpit, recommend you make an announcement, something positive. Morrison keyed the intercom, his voice shaky but now carrying hope instead of resignation. Ladies and gentlemen, earlier I told you we were out of options. I was wrong. We've received assistance from 2 Air Force F-22 pilots and from a passenger who has military aviation expertise far beyond anything I've encountered. We are attempting an emergency landing on a dry lake bed in Wyoming. It will not be gentle, but it will be survivable. Follow all flight attendant instructions, brace position on my command, and trust that we're being guided by the absolute best expertise available. We're going to make it. The approach was the longest 8 minutes of Morrison's life, every second a test of skill and courage and trust. Hammer talked him through power settings and attitude adjustments with patience and urgency. Blade provided constant external confirmation. 5 miles out, sync rate 1000, speed 190, looking good captain, power back to 65% both engines. 3 miles, continue descent, you're on profile. Viper 9, final check. Maya's voice carried the same calm her father's had maintained until his final transmission. Cabin secure, passengers braced, aircraft configured for emergency landing, crew is performing flawlessly. Bring her home, Captain. The impact was brutal but survivable. The 737 touched down gear up on the hard-packed lake bed at 140 knots, the belly grinding against earth with a sound like tearing metal and thunder. Dirt and debris erupted as the aircraft slid across the ancient lake bed, momentum bleeding off through friction and controlled desperation. Morrison and Walsh held controls with white-knuckled determination, using asymmetric thrust to keep the aircraft tracking straight, preventing the yaw that would have sent them cartwheeling to kill everyone. The tail section, held together by little more than composite fibers and stubborn engineering, flexed dangerously but held. The fuselage remained intact. After 31 seconds that felt like 31 years, United Flight 2847 came to rest in a cloud of dust in the middle of nowhere, Wyoming, damaged and scarred but still containing 217 living souls. Emergency slides deployed and passengers evacuated with organized chaos. Morrison and Walsh sat in the cockpit for a long moment, hands still on controls. Walsh spoke first. "David, what just happened?" Morrison could only shake his head. "I think a teenage girl just saved us all by knowing more about flying broken aircraft than we learned in entire careers. I think we just got a lesson in humility from someone young enough to be our daughter." Maya stood on the lake bed, dust settling, watching the F-22s make a low pass overhead, Hammer and Blade rocking their wings in traditional salute between pilots who'd shared something profound. Her phone buzzed with an encrypted message from her mother, "Just heard what happened. Proud of you, Viper 9. But we're having a very long conversation about when to use emergency protocols. Also grounded until you're 40. Call me immediately." Maya smiled, wiping tears she hadn't realized she was crying, feeling the weight of her call sign and legacy. Captain Morrison found her standing alone, still looking like a teenager despite having just executed aviation procedures most professional pilots couldn't comprehend. He stopped a few feet away, searching for adequate words. Finally, he simply said, "Thank you. I'm sorry I gave up. I'm sorry I told my passengers we were going to die. I'm sorry I didn't trust that there might be someone with knowledge exceeding mine. And I'm sorry I initially dismissed you because of your age. You saved every life on that aircraft." Maya turned to face him, and Morrison saw in her eyes something old and deep, accumulated wisdom of 4 generations of pilots who'd learned that aviation was ultimately about refusing to accept defeat. "Captain, you didn't give up. You declared honestly when you'd reached the limits of your knowledge. That took courage. And you listened when unconventional help arrived. That took even more courage. Most pilots can't accept assistance from outside their experience base, especially from a kid. You did. That's why everyone survived. You flew that broken aircraft exactly right once you had the framework to understand it differently. You saved your passengers, sir. We just helped you see how." 3 weeks later, Maya sat in a conference room at FAA headquarters in Washington, D.C., surrounded by officials simultaneously trying to commend her and figure out what regulations she'd violated. Her mother sat beside her in uniform, protective and proud. The administrator, a former Navy pilot who'd flown with Maya's grandfather in Vietnam, looked at her with exasperation and admiration. "Miss Castellano, you understand what you did was irregular," he began carefully. "You accessed military communication systems without authorization. You provided aviation consultation without proper credentials. You inserted yourself into an emergency situation violating numerous protocols. He paused. You also saved 217 lives using knowledge and expertise that most professional aviators don't possess. You correctly diagnosed a structural failure that baffled experienced pilots. You coordinated with military assets to execute an emergency landing that will be studied in aviation schools for decades. All while maintaining composure that would be remarkable in an experienced pilot, let alone a 15-year-old civilian passenger. He leaned back. So we have a problem. We need to acknowledge regulations exist for good reasons while also acknowledging those regulations didn't anticipate someone like you. What do you think we should do? Maya met his gaze with the directness her father had taught her. Sir, I think you should create a formal protocol for aviation family members with demonstrated expertise to serve as emergency consultants when circumstances warrant it. Not just me, there are dozens of kids from military aviation families who've absorbed professional-level knowledge through exposure. There are retired pilots who could provide consultation. There are engineers who understand aircraft systems at levels exceeding operational pilots. Aviation is safer when we use all available expertise, not just people we've officially credentialed. She paused. Flight 2847 is evidence that knowledge doesn't respect age or credentials. It respects preparation, experience, and courage to apply understanding when it matters. Yes, I violated regulations. But those regulations assumed teenage passengers couldn't contribute to emergency resolution. That assumption was wrong. Maybe the regulations need updating. The administrator smiled. You sound exactly like your father. He once told me regulations should serve safety, not the other way around, and any rule preventing smart people from helping in emergencies needed reconsideration. He glanced at other officials. Here's what we're doing. Officially, you'll receive a letter of reprimand for accessing systems without authorization. Unofficially, that letter will be accompanied by a commendation for exceptional performance during an aviation emergency, placed in your permanent record with a notation that you possess expert-level aviation knowledge. Additionally, we're creating the consultation protocol you described, and you're helping us design it. We're calling it the Castellano Protocol, and it's going to formalize how we access non-traditional expertise during emergencies. Her mother squeezed her hand under the table, pride radiating. Maya felt the weight of her call sign settling more firmly, understanding Viper 9 came with responsibilities extending beyond emergency interventions. She'd become a bridge between traditional aviation hierarchy and the reality that expertise could develop in unexpected places. 6 months after the emergency landing, Maya sat in high school physics class, half listening to a lecture about forces and motion that seemed comically simplistic compared to three-dimensional vector calculations she'd executed while talking down a dying aircraft. Her phone buzzed with a text from Captain Morrison. Just wanted you to know Jennifer and I are both back flying. We've completed additional training on emergency procedures including techniques you taught us. We're different pilots now, better, because we understand there's always more to learn and help can come from unexpected sources. Thank you for saving our lives and careers. If you ever need anything, call us. Your family now. Maya smiled and sent back, fly safe, Captain. Clear skies. That weekend, she visited her grandfather at his home in Virginia, finding him in his study surrounded by photographs and medals and memories stretching back to when aviation was young and dangerous in different ways. Tell me about it, he said simply, and Maya spent 3 hours walking through every detail of Flight 2847 while he listened with complete attention. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, then reached into a drawer and pulled out a small leather case. Inside was a simple pin, wings with a lightning bolt, handmade and worn with age. This was your great-grandfather's, from before official insignia existed. He made it himself from a piece of his Mustang after his first mission over Germany, said he wanted something to remind him he'd survived impossible circumstances and could do it again. He gave it to me before my first deployment to Vietnam. I gave it to your father before his first carrier qualification. He was going to give it to you when you earned your wings, but he ran out of time. His voice was steady but weighted with grief. "You've earned it now, Maya. You've proven you understand what it means to be a Viper, not the glory or recognition, but the responsibility to use your knowledge and courage when people need it most, even when it's dangerous, even when it violates regulations, even when nobody expects someone like you to have the expertise required." Maya held the pin carefully, feeling the weight of 4 generations of aviation excellence and sacrifice, understanding she was holding more than metal, she was holding a promise made across decades that knowledge would be passed down, that courage would be maintained, that the next generation would honor the previous by refusing to let impossible circumstances win. "Grandfather, what if I can't live up to this? What if Flight 2847 was just luck and I'm not actually capable of being the pilot everyone thinks I should become?" He smiled. "Your great-grandfather asked me the same question. Your father asked me the same question. Every Viper has doubted themselves because the legacy is heavy and expectations are high and the fear of disappointing people who sacrificed so much is real." He leaned forward with absolute conviction. "But here's what I told all of them and what I'm telling you, you don't have to live up to anyone's expectations but your own. That pin doesn't mean you have to become a fighter pilot or military aviator or anything specific. It means you understand that knowledge carries responsibility, that expertise should be used to help others, and that when circumstances demand courage, you don't hide behind age or credentials or fear, you step forward and do what needs doing. That's all. You've already proven you have that quality. Everything else is just choosing what form your contribution takes." Maya pinned it to her jacket, feeling it settle against her heart like it belonged there. They spent the rest of the afternoon looking through old photographs and flight logs, her grandfather telling stories about missions and pilots and aircraft lost to history but living in his memory, passing down oral traditions that couldn't be found in any book. As she drove home, Maya's phone buzzed with a message from Hammer. "Viper 9, got a question. We're updating our training curriculum for handling civilian aircraft emergencies and want to incorporate techniques you used. Would you be willing to consult on the program? Totally understand if you want to stay focused on high school stuff, but you've got insights that could save lives in future emergencies." She pulled over to consider the request properly, understanding this was another threshold moment. She could politely decline and focus on being a normal teenager, or accept and formally acknowledge that Viper 9 came with ongoing responsibilities that would shape the rest of her life. She thought about her father's final transmission, those calm words, "Viper 9 going down," that had exemplified grace under pressure. She thought about Captain Morrison's initial defeat and subsequent courage to accept unconventional help. She thought about her great-grandfather flying through German anti-aircraft fire. She thought about 217 people alive because knowledge had been passed down across generations and someone had been willing to use it despite regulations suggesting teenagers should remain silent passengers. She thought about the weight of that pin against her heart and what it represented, not glory or recognition but responsibility and service and the understanding that expertise demanded contribution. She typed carefully, committing to a path that would define her future. Hammer, Viper 9. I'm honored and I accept. Let's build a program that saves lives by acknowledging aviation expertise exists in unexpected places and emergencies don't respect credentials. When do we start? His response came immediately, outstanding. Welcome to the team, Viper 9. Your father would be proud. Hell, we're all proud. First meeting is next month at Nellis. We'll coordinate through your mother. Also, you should know your call sign is now in official Air Force documentation as an approved aviation consultant. You're the youngest person ever to hold that status. Don't let it go to your head, you're still responsible for getting good grades and doing your homework. That night, she sat at her desk staring at her father's photograph on the wall, him in his flight suit, standing in front of his F/18, smiling with easy confidence. She'd been 12 when he died, old enough to understand the loss but young enough that grief still felt raw 3 years later. Now, staring at his photograph while wearing the pin his great-grandfather had made and carrying the call sign he'd earned, Maya finally understood what he'd been trying to tell her. Aviation wasn't just a profession or passion, it was a commitment to use dangerous knowledge for protective purposes, to master complex systems so others could trust their lives to your expertise, to refuse to accept defeat when people were counting on you. Flight 2847 hadn't been luck or coincidence. It had been the culmination of 15 years of preparation she hadn't realized she was receiving, every air show and cockpit tour and tactical discussion building toward 8 minutes when inherited knowledge had been the difference between 217 deaths and 217 survivals. The story of Flight 2847 would eventually become an aviation case study, taught in military academies and commercial pilot training programs as an example of how unconventional expertise and creative problem-solving could overcome impossible circumstances. Maya's name would remain protected in public versions, but in military aviation circles, Viper 9 became synonymous with courage under pressure and inherited excellence, proving itself when stakes were highest. Years later, when she stood at the Air Force Academy graduation ceremony earning her wings and commission, when she flew her first solo in an F-35 while her mother watched crying with pride, when she eventually became an instructor herself teaching the next generation about emergency procedures and unconventional solutions, she would remember those 8 minutes at 35,000 feet when 2 experienced pilots had given up and a teenage girl with a legendary call sign had refused to let 217 people die simply because circumstances seemed impossible. Because that's what it meant to be Viper 9. Not perfection or flawlessness or even exceptional skill necessarily, but the stubborn refusal to accept defeat when knowledge and courage might make the difference, when people were counting on someone, anyone, to have answers conventional wisdom couldn't provide. It was the legacy her great-grandfather had started when he'd flown his damaged Mustang home from Germany despite being told to bail out. It was the tradition her grandfather had maintained when he'd landed his Phantom without hydraulics over Vietnam despite regulations saying it was impossible. It was the example her father had set when he'd sacrificed himself so his student could survive, proving that service meant more than survival. And it was the promise Maya had made, unknowingly, every time she'd listened to their stories and absorbed their wisdom and prepared herself for a moment she didn't know was coming but which arrived exactly when knowledge and courage were required to transform impossible into survivable. The pin rested against her heart, for generations of aviation excellence and sacrifice condensed into handmade metal and inherited wisdom. Below it, eventually, would come her own wings and medals and stories she'd pass down to whoever came after, continuing the tradition of Vipers who refused to let impossible circumstances win when people needed them most. But for now, at 15 years old, wearing faded jeans and an oversized hoodie, sitting in her kitchen with her mother while the evening sun painted everything gold and warm, she was simply Maya, extraordinarily ordinary and ordinarily extraordinary, a teenage girl who'd saved 217 lives and who would spend the rest of her life figuring out what that meant and how to honor it without being defined by it, carrying her call sign and her legacy into whatever future she chose to build. Her mother stood and walked to the window, looking out at the sky that had claimed her husband and nearly claimed her daughter in different ways. "You know what your father told me the day before his last flight," she said quietly. "He said that every Viper faces a moment where they have to choose between staying safe and stepping forward into danger to help others. He said that moment defines who you really are, not the training or the heritage or the call sign, just that one choice when everything is on the line." She turned back to Maya, tears glistening. "You made that choice at 15 years old. You stepped forward when grown men with decades of experience had given up. That's not just inheriting a legacy, Maya. That's creating your own." 2 years later, Maya stood at the gate of the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, her acceptance letter in hand and her great-grandfather's pin still against her heart. The businessman from 14B, whose name she'd learned was Robert Chen, had written one of her recommendation letters, describing in detail how a teenage girl had saved his life and fundamentally changed his understanding of courage and expertise. Captain Morrison and First Officer Walsh had written another, stating simply that if the Air Force didn't accept Maya Castellano, they were making the biggest recruitment mistake in aviation history. The morning she left for the academy, she received a package from United Airlines. Inside was a framed photograph of Flight 2847 after the emergency landing, the damaged aircraft sitting in the Wyoming dust, emergency vehicles surrounding it, survivors standing in groups hugging each other. On the back, 217 signatures. Every single passenger and crew member had signed it. At the top, in Captain Morrison's handwriting, were the words, "To Viper 9, you gave us tomorrow. We'll never forget. Fair winds and following seas." During her first year at the academy, Maya excelled in ways that surprised no one who knew her story but amazed those who didn't. She topped her class in aeronautical engineering, aced every flight simulation, and became the go-to consultant when instructors wanted to discuss unconventional emergency procedures. But she also remained grounded, remembering her grandfather's words that the pin represented responsibility, not superiority. She helped struggling classmates, volunteered to tutor younger students, and never once mentioned Flight 2847 unless directly asked. In her third year, during an advanced tactical aviation course, her instructor, a retired F-22 pilot named Colonel Davidson, stopped mid-lecture and looked directly at her. "Cadet Castellano, would you mind sharing with the class how you'd handle a commercial aircraft with catastrophic tail damage and complete hydraulic failure?" The room fell silent. Her classmates turned to look at her, confused by the oddly specific question. Maya met the colonel's eyes and saw the slight smile there. He knew. Of course he knew. She stood and walked to the front of the class, and for the next 45 minutes, she walked her fellow cadets through every detail of Flight 2847, not as a hero telling war stories, but as an instructor sharing hard-won knowledge that might someday save their lives or the lives of people depending on them. She explained the vibration signatures, the asymmetric thrust management, the coordination with the F-22s, the psychology of helping defeated pilots regain hope and control. When she finished, the classroom erupted in applause, but she raised her hand for silence. "Here's what I need you to understand," she said firmly. "I didn't save Flight 2847 because I'm special or uniquely talented. I saved it because 4 generations of pilots before me refused to let their knowledge die with them. They passed it down through stories and lessons and patient explanations to a kid who probably seemed too young to understand. Every single person in this room has knowledge that could save lives someday. The question isn't whether you're good enough or experienced enough or credentialed enough. The question is, when that moment comes, will you have the courage to step forward and use what you know? Because people are counting on you, even if they don't know it yet." Colonel Davidson nodded slowly. "That, cadets, is what we're trying to teach you here. Not just how to fly aircraft, but why we fly them. Not just technical skills, but moral courage. Cadet Castellano understands something that takes most pilots decades to learn, that aviation is ultimately about humans helping humans survive." Dismissed. After class, the colonel pulled Maya aside. "Your father and I flew together at Top Gun," he said quietly. "He talked about you constantly. Showed everyone pictures of this little girl who could identify aircraft by engine sound before she could read. He was so proud of you, Maya. And he'd be even prouder now." He handed her a small envelope. "He asked me to give this to you when you made it to the academy. Said I'd know the right time." Maya's hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a letter in her father's handwriting, dated 2 weeks before his death. "My dearest Maya, if you're reading this, it means I didn't make it home, and it means you've chosen to follow the family tradition into aviation. I'm so sorry I won't be there to see you earn your wings, but I want you to know something important. You don't owe me anything. You don't owe our family anything. This legacy we've built, it's not a burden you have to carry. It's a gift we're offering you, and you get to choose whether to accept it. If you decide aviation isn't your path, I'll be just as proud of you. But if you do choose to fly, remember this, the call sign Viper isn't about being the best or the bravest or the most skilled. It's about refusing to give up when people need you. It's about using your knowledge to protect others, even when it's hard, even when it's scary, even when regulations or conventions say you should stay quiet. That's all. That's the only requirement. I love you more than you'll ever know, and wherever I am, I'm watching over you with more pride than words can express. Fly safe, my beautiful girl. Dad." Maya read it 3 times, tears streaming down her face, then carefully folded it and placed it in her wallet next to the lifetime United Airlines pass. That night, she called her mother. "Mom, I found my path. I know what I want to do." Her mother's voice was warm. "Tell me, sweetheart." Maya took a deep breath. "I want to become an instructor. Not just a pilot, but someone who teaches the next generation. I want to pass down what Dad and grandfather and great-grandfather taught me. I want to make sure their knowledge doesn't die, that their wisdom keeps saving lives long after we're all gone. Is that enough? Is that honoring the legacy?" Her mother laughed, and it was the sound of pure joy. "Maya, that's exactly what the legacy is supposed to be. Not about individual glory, but about making sure the knowledge survives. Your father would say that's the most important mission of all. I'm so proud of you." 5 years later, Captain Maya Castellano stood in front of her first class of student pilots at Nellis Air Force Base, wearing the wings she'd earned and the pin her great-grandfather had made. She was 23 years old and already a legend in military aviation circles, not just because of Flight 2847, but because of the Castellano protocol that had saved 6 more commercial flights in the years since, each time using the non-traditional expertise consultation framework she'd helped design. But to her students, she was simply their instructor, someone who would push them hard and teach them well and maybe, if they were lucky, pass down wisdom that could save their lives someday. "Good morning," she began, her voice carrying the same calm authority she'd used at 15 while talking down a dying aircraft. "My name is Captain Castellano, call sign Viper 9, and I'm going to teach you how to fly broken aircraft through impossible circumstances and bring them home anyway. Not because it's easy, but because people are counting on you to know how. My great-grandfather flew P-51s over Germany. My grandfather flew F-4s over Vietnam. My father flew F-18s from carrier decks. My mother flies F-35s and is currently deployed. And at 15 years old, I talked down a commercial airliner with catastrophic damage that professional pilots thought was unflyable. I'm not telling you this to impress you. I'm telling you this so you understand that the knowledge I'm about to share was earned in blood and terror and triumph by people who refuse to let impossible situations kill them. Pay attention. Ask questions. Challenge assumptions. And most importantly, understand that someday you'll face a moment where everything you know will be tested. When that moment comes, I want you to be ready." A young cadet in the front row raised his hand nervously. "Ma'am, how do you handle the pressure? Knowing that people's lives depend on your decisions?" Maya smiled, thinking about 217 passengers and her father's final transmission and her grandfather's stories and her great-grandfather's handmade pin. "You remember that you're not alone. You're part of a legacy of people who faced the same fears and found the courage anyway. You lean on their wisdom, you trust your training, and you refuse to give up. And someday, when you're old and gray, you pass that knowledge down to the next generation. That's how we survive the impossible, together, across time, refusing to let the hard-won lessons die." The cadet nodded, understanding dawning in his eyes. Maya looked at her class, young faces full of hope and determination and the slight fear that comes from choosing a dangerous path, and felt the weight of her call sign settle comfortably on her shoulders. She was Viper 9, teacher and protector, keeper of inherited wisdom and creator of new knowledge. Her father would be proud. Her entire family would be proud. But most importantly, she was proud of herself, proud of the choice she'd made at 15 to step forward when others stepped back, proud of the life she was building in service to others. The pin rested against her heart, still warm from 4 generations of courage and sacrifice. And somewhere above the clouds, she imagined her father smiling, knowing that the legacy was safe, that the knowledge would continue, that Viper 9 would keep flying and keep teaching and keep refusing to let impossible circumstances win. Because that's what Vipers do. They don't give up. They don't let people die when knowledge could save them. They pass down wisdom across generations. And they understand that aviation, at its core, is simply humans helping other humans survive the dangerous miracle of flight, one impossible situation at a time.